So, hey everyone, today we are going to talk about best practices for writing a literature review. It is something that a lot of people ask me about. It's something that seems overwhelming to many, mainly because the literature just keeps growing. And a lot of people feel very, like I said, overwhelmed about how to approach it. So, today's tutorial is to give you some guidelines on how to approach writing a lit review. And as you can see by this slide, I'm going to focus a lot on organization, specifically on how to approach the lit review, how to use resources that are available to you, as well as any barriers that you might face. I'll give you some tips on how to maybe break those down. So with that, a little bit about me and why I'm qualified to talk to you about writing a lit review. So my name is Elaine Smolock. I have been directing writing services and grant development at the University of Rochester Medical Center for over 17 years. In those 17 years, I have been in research roles. So I've been a postdoc fellow, a research assistant professor in a lab. And then 10 years ago, I decided to jump more into research education and have since then directed several research education programs and really focused a lot of my time on teaching students and postdocs how to write, which includes writing lit reviews. So let's get started. The approach that I'm going to run through today has several steps. I'm a very step-oriented person, and we're going to use the metaphor of, running. And before you can run, you got to walk. So we're going to talk about the steps and how to approach writing a lit review. So we're going to cover how to narrow your topic and select papers accordingly, how to extend the search for the literature, and yes, AI can help, and we will pause to talk about where AI is appropriate. Then you need to read those articles thoroughly and evaluate them. Next, you need to organize those papers by looking for patterns or themes and then developing subtopics. Again, AI can be used in this sense, so we'll talk about that. And then importantly, you need to develop a thesis or a purpose statement. Then you start writing the paper, and then finally you review your work. So in the next set of slides, we're going to review each of these steps in order. So let's start our journey. And again, I use the metaphor of running or taking a journey or a hike because it is sort of what it's like. There are milestones as you go. You want to hit mile markers. And before you start running or hiking, whatever it is that you would like to do or use for your metaphor, we have to start by walking. So the warm up, if you will, to your run or to your hike is narrowing your topic. And that seems like a very blanket statement. And I don't mean to say that's easy because I know that it's difficult. But here are some ways that we can think about maybe making what seems like a hard task an easy one. So some lit reviews are dictated by the fact that your teacher tells you what you need to write about, or your professor says, please write this review, or a journal requests that you write a review because you've been deemed an expert in the field. Those are the easy ways because you're told what to write about. Sometimes it's not that easy, but you want to write a lit review because it's really good for your academic and your professional development. So some ways to approach narrowing your topic is journaling. There's a lot of great research out there about the impact of journaling daily on organizing your thoughts and helping you focus on a topic that you really feel passionate about. So taking 5 to 10 minutes a day to journal about what you've read, what you've seen, what you've heard, it is a great way to determine and narrow down your topic. Also doing a focus Google search. Google's totally okay to find information and help you narrow down. And of course, there are a lot of social media such as X, Blue Sky, TikTok, Instagram, Stat. These are all platforms where there are science-heavy topics and a lot of information being shared, and that may help you identify an area that you want to learn more about and write about. Also, talking in groups with friends, right? Just having a brainstorm, a coffee chat, something like that, where you just get together and talk about ideas or talk about gaps in the field and things you want to address. Also, AI, it is a growing field, of course, but it can also help you, right? You could put in some ideas to a platform that is approved, also by your university, to get some ideas out there. And that's okay way to help. We'll talk a little bit more about where we can use AI to help generate that feedback. But the point is, where it might feel overwhelming to come up with a topic, there are some ways that things you do daily that can actually help you narrow that topic down. Okay. Once you get that topic, then the search for the literature begins. And notice I haven't said anything really about writing yet. We're still in the organizational and the preparation stage. So let's talk about how we start searching for literature and what we do with it. So in this general idea or this general point, we're going to talk about steps 2, 3, and 4, where we search, read, and organize. And we're going to pick up some speed now. So we're going from a walk to maybe a light to a faster jog. So when you're searching the literature, which can be daunting, especially because there's new literature every day, sometimes in 1 hour, there might be 10 more articles that come out. So how do you approach that? So here are some tips that I've used with my students when I'm meeting with them, as well as my postdocs. I say write out 3 to 4 subtopics that interest you. So once you've narrowed down that topic, if you've done some journaling or you did some brainstorming with friends or a coffee chat, maybe there were some subtopics you're like, oh, that's really interesting, and I think I want to expand on these certain areas underneath the big umbrella. So think 3 to 4. More is too much, less is too little. Right? Then I use what's called a pyramid approach, and I'm going to break that down in the next few slides about how to build up those topics. Keywords, right? So every journal has mesh terms or keywords. Those keywords are important because they are signifying what that paper is about. And if you find a lot of papers that use the same key terms, you may want to use those keywords as subtopics for your pyramid building. Then you can start searching those keywords to expand them out a little. Right? So let's break down these tips one by one. So let's talk about the pyramid approach, building topic by topic. So I'm going to use the analogy of cardiovascular physiology because that is where I focused my bench research when I was still in the lab. And one of the things I was really interested in when I was in the lab was the combination of the intersection of genetics, atherosclerosis, which is a cardiovascular disease, and the impacts of exercise. Those are pretty broad categories, even by themselves, they're broad categories. But connecting to the cardiovascular physiology, I had to start to narrow my focus a little bit under each of these topics. So one thing to think about when you pick one of those pyramids, so let's start with genetics, the one that was on the far left. So there are perhaps three keywords, right? We talked about looking at those keywords across journals when you search for them and you start to put them together. So let's say that I decided that inherited, mutations, and testing were the three keywords that I found most commonly across the literature that I found. For each of those keywords, then, you want to start organizing the papers that match those. That allows you to start building up some reference list for each of those terms, which will then help you start building out your paragraphs, will help building out the body of your paper, right? And it also, along the way, keeps you organized. Again, there are many tools to help you do this instead of just handwriting, although I'm still a big fan of writing things out by hand because you make a connection neurologically in your brain. But there are a lot of tools, and we'll review those at the end, that can help with structuring an organization as you're seeing on this slide. Right? But as an example, under inherited for genetics, we found person X, maybe it was the year 2024. They are focusing on cardiovascular disease and looking at it that it's 50% familial. So you can see here, not only did I write the paper down, but I also summarized in my own words what that paper is about. Creating a bullet point list of summarizing those papers in these boxes, if you will actually help you with your writing because you can sort of copy and paste it later or build paragraphs from it, right? So this is really important because it's part of your structure and organization. Moving forward, trying to accelerate a little bit, once you've done all of that, now you're ready to actually develop a thesis or a purpose statement based on these categories, right? So let's say you've now developed your 3 or 4 pyramids, which are your 3 or 4 subtopics. You had keywords that you delineated out further with the references and summarizing the main points of those papers. Based on all of that now, you have to develop a thesis or a purpose statement. One big flaw I see across the board when I'm reading and helping students and postdocs write a lit review is that there isn't a clear purpose statement. And they get trapped in just sort of summarizing all the literature, but not sort of gluing it together and telling me why it matters and why I should be reading this paper. So that is one thing you really want to work on, is a direct statement. In that statement, really, you want to be concise and you want to tell the reader exactly what the review article is about. Be clear. What is the main thing or things, if there's a couple topics, that you're trying to communicate? So sentences such as, the purpose of this literature review is to. It might seem obvious, but those key words tell the person who's reading, like, okay, right now, if I'm skimming and I find the sentence, and let's say I didn't process everything you wrote before that, I understand the purpose of this. And sometimes those purpose statements end up being similar to the title of the paper as well. All right, so once you've finally done all of that, and I've only gone through it in just a few minutes, and of course it can take days, weeks, maybe months to organize everything. But once you've done all that and you've sort of situated yourself with all the organizational strategies that I just reviewed, then you can start the actual process of writing the review. And in this analogy, perhaps starting to run the race, or maybe you're hiking up the Appalachian Trail, what have you. So to start running that race, what you want to do is build on the skeleton or those pyramids of the outline and utilize the references that you already included for those keywords, right? So if you've done all that work, now we're going to take that skeleton and you're going to expand it out into full paragraphs. So with that, what does it really mean to sit down and actually write, right? We all have different relationships with writing. Some people love it. Some people really have anxiety around it. Some people have really great strategies for sitting down and doing it in, a couple hours, and some need to spread it out over the whole day. Whatever that means to you, it's okay. But there are some really important milestones or structural mechanisms that you should do no matter where your happy place is when you write. First, you do want to take those pyramids, and the key points from each of those key terms, turn them into sentences, right? So I had the one about cardiovascular disease is 50% familial. I want to take that sentence, or that bullet point rather, and turn it into a longer sentence with more content around it. And what I will say, and what I think it means to write, is not worrying about being perfect. Just start creating those sentences. And then for each of those topics, those pyramids, have a clear topic sentence. You should include the papers and thoughts that you were reviewing, and then you should provide a clear summary sentence to let the reader know that you were moving on to a new topic or keyword. So as you transition between either the subtopics within each pyramid or certainly between pyramids, you want keywords that help the reader know that you're transitioning, right? Then you want to start, again, connecting the sentences together using these transition words that provide logic and flow. And when you're doing that, you want to think about this structure, right? So paragraphs, so kind of back to maybe elementary learning about how to write. Paragraph structure is still incredibly important in scientific writing. There should be a topic sentence. So if we use, again, my pyramid example, the topic is genetics. And in this case, it's inherited, right? So I want some sentence in that pyramid or that paragraph that talks about, the factors of inherited genes or inheritance in transferring cardiovascular disease, right? And then you want to look for the supporting key terms. So as we go down, maybe mutations, testing, and any other keywords that you may have come out, take those summary sentences and start turning them into, have a flow going from your topic sentence down, right? And then again, a concluding sentence at the end. Summarize why this topic is important. These are the hallmarks of a paragraph, and we don't want to lose those when you're writing your review. Oftentimes, what I see happen is someone writes a paragraph and it's a really long paragraph. It might take 2 or 3 pages and they forgot to just take a break, or they didn't understand where they needed to transition and stop and start a new topic. So you want to be very mindful of that. One way to help with that, when I'm talking about flow and logic and points and counterpoints, is to think about the terms that we often see in scientific writing and that many people think are boring or we shouldn't use them, but we absolutely should. So some key words that you want to make sure you put in when you're comparing and contrasting your literature are things like however, or similarly, in contrast, moreover, yet, likewise, on the other hand, in addition, etc. These words, although again, it feels like you might repeat them a little bit or you're just using a synonym for something else, they are still a clear way for the reader to know that you're switching topics or that you're continuing to build on a topic, like similarly, likewise, or consistently, right? So when you're building out your paragraphs, building up your pyramids, make sure you're using transition words between your sentences and then also between paragraphs to help the reader know what's coming next. Okay. So we talked about paragraph writing, but let's talk about the actual body of the literature review, right? So we're going to take all those paragraphs and we're going to build them up. There are 3 main parts to a lit review, much like there are to maybe essays that you wrote when you were an undergrad, if you remember those, or if you're a creative writer. These 3 parts, the introduction, body, and conclusion, are similar across almost all styles of writing. So when you're writing a lit review, you want to have a clear introduction. That introduction should provide the main topic of the review in terms of the central theme or the organizational pattern. And I would say keep it to 2 or 3 paragraphs that provide general information or some statistical background or some chronological or historical context for the subject that you're covering. And then end with that purpose or that thesis statement. That's exactly where that thesis statement should go, is at the end of the introduction. Right? So another myth is that the intros need to be long. They don't. If they're too long, you're going to lose the reader too quickly. The intro should be 2 to 3 paragraphs, rather, maybe a page, page and a half. And then we want to quickly transition to the body, which is where you elaborate on those subtopics and build your pyramids. And that's what we just talked about in the previous couple slides, where we talked about building up, a keyword, building sentences from that, and using transition words to move between topics. That's the body, all of those paragraphs that related to the literature that you searched. And then at the end, there should be a conclusion. Some people call it a discussion or an implication section. You can use whatever word you like, but it is a nod to the reader that we're ending the review. And in that, we're going to summarize and restate the main purpose. So you can recycle the purpose or the thesis statement. And then you want to talk about why, the implications of why this work is important, why you're reviewing this, right? And that could be clinically related, it could be public health, it could be for a methodology, it could be for advancing conceptual ideas, whatever you've deemed that literature to indicate, that's what you want to state. And then importantly, what are the remaining gaps or controversies? What are the limitations that you notice in the literature? And where can this go next? What is the future work? So you can sort of think about this if we were taking the hike view, or if you're running on a long road, where do you see this ending in the very end? Where do you want to end up, right? So what comes next? Good perspective. So again, there are 3 main parts. This is true for almost any writing project we've ever had. So we're not really reinventing the wheel. We're just trying to talk about structure and how to do it for scientific literature review writing. Okay, so we ran the race, we got to that end point, we talked about our future directions, we did all the writing, and now you have to cool down and recover. And don't rush this part, right? So if we use, again, the running analogy, if you just stop and you sit down, you're not going to feel too great the next day. So here's where you want to actually review your work, take a breath, read it over, and make sure that you're doing the editing, right? So if you have a deadline for a lit review, and there isn't always a strict deadline for literature review. Sometimes journals are like, we encourage you to write this, please submit it in the next year. Sometimes there's a hard deadline, right? But whatever that is, I would suggest, if there isn't a hard deadline, that you set one for yourself, and then also in that, build time to review. Ignoring this step can be the difference truly between a good and a great paper. Tips for doing this, and this is sometimes the hard part, when you're reviewing, focus only on one section at a time, and sometimes review it backwards. Maybe you want to start with the conclusion, then read the body, then read the introduction. Because what happens is we tend to reread, because we read linearly, we read from the top to the bottom. So you've spent a lot of time on your intro and maybe the first half of the body, but then you get tired and don't read the rest as carefully, or you didn't take as much time to write the rest. If you read backwards, you'll then balance your focus across the whole paper, right? Also, giving the draft to at least 2 people, and I say 2, but I think 3 or 4 is probably great, to read. They will be the ones that will help you with content, flow, logic. Also give to somebody who knows nothing about your field, but they're really good in grammar. Of course, you can use Grammarly and things like that, but giving it to people to read and using just natural human intelligence to say, oh, I didn't understand this. Seems like these sentences are too rushed or too long, something like that can be really helpful, right? And then always go back and compare it to your outline. Did you miss anything? Did you spend too much time in one pyramid? For instance, is one pyramid bigger than another? Because you do want balance. You don't want there to be too much on one topic, too little on another. You sort of want those pyramids to be balanced across the body. Right? And then giving it to somebody to make sure you didn't miss anything, because there might be a really interesting, cool topic that you weren't aware of yet that you might want to include. The only way to know that is by giving it to people to review. All right, so I mentioned a little bit about AI, and I want to talk about how you can incorporate that, right? This is an evolving field, and everyone is using it in some capacity. For instance, if you're using Word or you're using Google Docs, Grammarly, if you installed the Grammarly app, it's telling you when you've made mistakes, when you've typed something wrong, you've spelled something wrong. That's sort of a built-in AI that's totally acceptable. But if you're using AI in the form of something like ChatGPT or an open AI platform, you must first get permission from your advisor or your institute or your course instructor, or whoever it is that you are working with, to use that generative AI in your search and in your writing. Because you don't want to put anything out there that can be searchable or queued by somebody else, because the learning networks will just pull from that and keep creating things. So you want to make sure what you're putting out there is legit and peer reviewed. But not saying you can't use it, just make sure you get permission. And then also being transparent about its use, don't hide it. And I would caution to not use public or external systems, especially when including any data. If it's a review article and you're actually going to insert some of your own preliminary findings or pilot study, you don't want to put that out there prematurely, because ChatGPT is not a peer-reviewed source. So definitely using internal and safeguarded firewalled AI systems is best, right? And then of course, always follow academic honesty policies. A little bit more on resources that you can use. Of course, many of us use PubMed, which is from the National Library of Medicine, Google Scholar. If you're at the University of Rochester, I would promote our library, the minor library, because we have subject-specific librarians. So if you were at a different institution, go to your library, because I bet, librarians there who are specific to your field and can really help you organize. Beyond that, of course, there are a lot of organizational referencing software such as EndNote, Mendeley, RefWorks, Zotero. These are great tools. I actually really like the Cite while you write aspect of EndNote, and some of the other ones have those too, because it helps you stay organized. So even when you're building your pyramids, you could have EndNote open and you could insert that reference. So these are really great. If you're not familiar with these systems, a lot of them are free and downloadable. And sometimes, the library at your university also has license, and they also have specialized librarians who focus on these these software. So I would connect with them to make sure that you're using it correctly. But please make sure you're using a resource to help you out with your organization. Another very useful resource is understanding APA and how to use this formatting for referencing. There are others out there too. Of course, it depends on the journal and what they're asking for, but a lot of lit reviews are written in APA style. And I personally like to use Purdue University's online writing lab. They have wonderful resources that are open to anyone, and you can search for those. So if you're not really familiar with how to use APA, this is a great resource. And if you're inserting figures or quotes, if you're doing qualitative analysis as well, there's all kinds of tips on how best to use APA to write and cite your lit review. In terms of citing, if we are using AI, some things I want you to be aware of in terms of how to cite it and being transparent about its use. There are some norms around reporting generative AI that are still evolving. So again, you want to check with your university on that. I will say that the NSF and also the NIH currently recommend attribution in the context of proposing research. And at the University of Rochester, we have a policy on that. So if you are at the U of R, I highly encourage you to check out the AI policy for our institution. If you're another institution, really should check with either your tech office or whoever is in charge of sort of organizing policies and rules around generative AI for your university. But you should cite it. So it can either be officially an acknowledgement, or it could be a whole paragraph where you're disclosing it. Even if you're using something like BioRender to create images, which is also sort of a form of AI, you also want to disclose that. So again, you just want to be very transparent about using it and how you used it, whether you use it only in literature search or if you use it in terms of helping clean up your paragraphs, clean up sentences, etc. Okay, so be honest about it. So the last thing I wanted to talk about in my 7 points I wanted to cover was overcoming writer's block. So I started this whole thing by saying that writing a lit review, and actually writing anything, can feel very overwhelming. And for some people, there's just a true writer's block. I understand it. Even though I love to write, I still often come up against it myself. So what I just want to talk about briefly, and I know there's not a lot on this slide, but things I want you to think about. If you don't like to write, think about what are your fears about writing. Is it sharing it? Is it your actual ability to organize? Is it that maybe English isn't your first language and you're worried about that? There are many different reasons that you might have a fear of writing. For me, and for most of the students and postdocs that I work with, it is the fact that you're putting something out there and then someone's going to critique it. And that is hard. And we in academia often have reviewers come back and tell us what they didn't like, and it always feels very personal. But just know that there are ways to get around that. For instance, if you do like to write, what I've heard people share about how they enjoy the process is they either find a happy place, right? So if you like to be in coffee shops, if you like to be in a library, if you like to be home, finding the place that you like to write can actually make the writing process better. Others who like to write have told me that they like the time of day, whether they're morning or night or an afternoon person, they find it and they stick to it. That can be very helpful too. Others who that admit to me that they like to write, just say they like the creative process of it. And for those, and I think that's the biggest barrier to overcome, they just free write. They don't worry about anything being perfect. They just get it out and worry about putting the thoughts together in cohesive sentences and paragraphs later. They just get the bullet points out and just let it go. And a lot of people like to draw, and I would encourage, like I said with my pyramid analogy, draw some things out, create some diagrams, create some flow, almost like a genealogy of connecting things. Sometimes a visualization can really help with the writing. So if you do have fears about writing, Know that there are a lot of resources and tools. You can certainly Google, the joy of writing and see what comes up. There's a lot of great books. If you want to reach out to me at the University of Rochester, you can look up my email. I'm happy to give you some tips on that. And as I said in the beginning, some other ways to overcome: journaling, drawing, just writing, allowing yourself a break or reward is another great one. Stop being self-critical. Share what you write as you go. Find the person that you feel comfortable. If you have someone at your university like myself who works with students and postdocs one-on-one with writing, that's a great resource for you. And the other thing I actually tell students to do a lot is make a presentation first, because oftentimes whatever you've put in a PowerPoint, or if you're using Canvas slides or whatever that you're using, those presentations are organized in a way that makes sense to tell a story. And then you can go back to the slides and say, oh, what did I say there? And then you could record it, and then you could transfer it to the paper, and you've actually both presented and written at the same time. So these are some tips to maybe help you overcome any of that anxiety that you might have about writing. Or even if you do like to write, but you just feel the block, think about these tips to help you get over that block. So with that, thank you for listening to my advice and best practices on how to write a literature review. I just want to leave you with this thought, and maybe again coming back to the metaphor of looking down the road. If you're running or hiking and seeing the beautiful perspective in front of you at the end point, just know that even the best writers feel the way you probably do now, or will feel that way at some point. We all struggle with writing. And again, I think it's because we know we're being judged on it. But if you can just know that you're in good company and that you've got a lot of support, you're going to get to that end point in your journey. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope that you enjoy writing your literature review.